All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We're your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I'm your host, per usual. Thank you all very much for listening. I know this is probably going to be a smaller show. I don't know about runtime, but bigger shows draw bigger numbers, even for a smaller podcast like mine. So, the last 306 drew some decent numbers. I imagine this one not quite as much, but if you're still listening for whatever the reason, I thank you for it. It means a lot to me. Let's see. On the agenda this evening, we're going to preview UFC on ESPN Plus 101. That'll come our way this coming Saturday. Let's see. We will also a little bit of news. Not a whole lot, just a little bit, but we'll talk about what there is kind of to talk about. And yeah. So anything you can do to help out the product, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, y'all know the drill. Alright, let's jump right into that. This, shall we? It is way too late for me to be doing this, but today was weird. UFC on ESPN Plus 101. The UFC is back in France. They're at the Yacourt Arena in Paris with a really good main event, believe it or not. We have in the lightweight division. Sorry about that. We will have Renato Moicano, the money man himself, taking on Benoit Saint-Denis, the former French paratrooper. And it's a good fight. It's a good fight. There's not really any two ways about that one. Gonna have a decently high pace. Gonna have a lot of violence. Both these guys tend to be finishers. I mean, Santa Moicano's never been the distance, but it's rarer for him to go the distance. I mean, in his UFC career, which is surprisingly long, been here for 10 years actually. Almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in December. Let's see. One, two, three, four. Yeah, only 5 decisions, both wins and losses, during his entire UFC run. So it's a little bit rare for him to go the full distance. And old BSD there. Uh, has he ever gone the distance? Good grief. No. Only fight he's gone the distance in was his loss to Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. And that was up at welterweight. Um, yeah, everything else has been inside the distance. So a couple of guys with a fairly lengthy track record of finishing fights. Saint-Denis coming off of the loss to Dustin Poirier, his first loss at lightweight. He gave Dustin a few problems before kind of getting suckered into Poirier's kind of brawl. Good fight. That was a good back and forth thing. And that was earlier this year. Good stuff there. Moicano was last seen. I just looked at this. Beating Jalen Turner. Memory serves he had kind of a tough first round, but really got things going in the second. He's on a 3-fight winning streak overall. Wins over Brad Riddell, Drew Dober, and the aforementioned Turner. I mean, his only losses at lightweight are to Rafael Fiziev and Rafael Dos Anjos. And that Dos Anjos one he took on short notice, and that was a whole thing. So, a couple of fairly talented lightweights looking for their really kind of like a rival performance. They've both done good work, but they're both looking to put a big stamp on things, like I'm here and I'm ready to make a lot of noise. And let's see, wow, what's the age here? Moicano's 35, so going to be rougher for him to make a serious run. Not impossible, but rougher. Saint-Denis is only 28. Saint-Denis hits real hard. Moicano's fairly durable. I mean, he's only been, how many times has he been stopped with strikes? Fazeev. Okay, Aldo stopped him with punches. The Korean Zombie got him with punches. His only other loss in his entire career is to Brian Ortega. So, fairly durable. He's absorbed some damage at times. I mean, he took a serious beating from Dos Anjos and just never stopped. This is it's a really good fight. I'm very much looking forward to this one. There's a few on this card. This is a really, for a fight night card, generally this is getting a thumbs up. There's a couple of fights on here that, I could do without, but there's always a couple. This is a perfectly fine main event. Very much looking forward to it. The 5 rounds is an interesting thing. Moicano's gone 5, only in the loss to Dos Anjos, but he still went all 5. Santini's conditioning was a little bit of a question mark in the Poirier fight. Asterisk that with the fact that he was dealing with staph, the aftermath of a staph infection, because that'll ruin your cardio in a hurry. The odds are surprisingly heavy towards Santini. He's about 2-1 favorite. I'm not opposed to him being a favorite, but that's a fairly, I don't know that I agree with that. I mean, some of this is designed to induce betting, of course. I'm only speaking about where they are right now as I record. He's almost 3-1 in some places. That's asking for a bit of trouble. Just throwing that out there. That's asking for some trouble. Moicano's been doing some really solid work lately. He has had some problems, especially if he can't get takedowns. And his defense is still, it's still not necessarily where you'd really like it to be, especially against a guy who can club like Santini can. I'm going to go with Santini. But I don't think those odds are an accurate reflection of how close this fight is. Just going to throw that out there. Getting like, 2-1 or so on, getting like 2.5 almost to 1 on Moicano. Yeah, like plus 220, give or take. So not quite 2.5, but 2.25. If you're just looking for value, that's not a bad place to look. Your co-main event is also a pretty darn good fight. At middleweight, Nasruddin Imavov and Brendan Allen. Imavov only has 2 losses in the UFC. A majority decision to Phil Hawes. That was a little bit weird. And then a short notice loss to Sean Strickland. He had the weird fight with Chris Curtis that went to a no contest. Since then, Roman Dolidze and Jared Cannonier. People complained about the Cannonier stoppage. It's not the best stoppage in the world, but I could understand it, personally. Imavov really seems to have been finding his stride over his last few fights. He's only 29. 6'3", which is a good-sized middleweight. Then we got Brendan Allen. Allen's been doing some good work. He hasn't lost since he lost to Chris Curtis in 21. Wins over Sam Alvey, Jacob Malkoun, Christoph Yotko, Andre Muniz, Bruno Silva, Paul Craig, and I don't remember how I scored that fight between him and Chris Curtis. I want to say I leaned Curtis, but don't quote me on. I might be wrong about how I'm misremembering that, but it's a fairly close fight. Allen Riggin really kind of surging. Allen's a good grappler, but getting Imavov down is not easy. Allen's striking it's functional, but it mostly serves to try and facilitate his getting things down rather than being a big threat unto itself. It's still nothing you can take lightly, but not really his. That's not where most of his work is done. Odds are with Imavov to a fairly heavy degree in some of these things. Jeez. I can kind of see it. I don't see it as heavily as this. Am I going to pick another favorite here? If of those two, I'm more inclined towards Allen than Moicano, all things considered. Let me still lean Imavov, but I don't know about that one. I don't want to asterisk one or two of these. Let me asterisk both of these real fast. I need to do a little. I need to double check a few things on those guys, but in general, I'm okay, going with Imavov. Next up, featherweight, we have William Gomis and Joe Anderson Brito. I think pretty highly of Brito. 17-3-1, five fight winning streak. He's 5-1 in the UFC. Lost his debut to Bill Algeo, but since then, been on kind of a tear. Andre Fili, Lucas Alexander, Weston Wilson, Jonathan Pearson, Jack Shore. So, escalation there, pretty visible. Unfortunately, lost out on a fight with Dan Ige. I would have liked his chances there. I still would have picked Ige, I think, but I don't know, maybe not. He's been doing some really good work. William Gomis, 13-2, 11 fight winning streak. That is certainly nothing to sneeze at. 3-0 in the UFC. See, majority decision over Jarno Aarons. That was fine. Split over Francis Marshall. I think I agreed with that one going his way. Stopped Giannis Gamori with body kicks a little over a year ago. He's had 3 fights fall out since then. Lucas Almeida, Melsik Bagdasarian, and Jean Silva. I would have liked his chances in 2 of those. Almeida and Bagdasarian, I would have liked his chances. Jean Silva, not so much, but Silva's actually, pretty darn good. I'm gonna go with Brito here. As I said, I think pretty highly of him. I'm not trying to sleep on Gomis, but Brito, how old is he real fast? He's one of those very old faces, but I don't know how old he actually is. Oh, he's only 29. That dude looks 40. Some guys just have that. No problem going Brito here. Once again, not to diminish Gomis, who I don't think is a bad fighter by any stretch, but Brito strikes me as a very, very legitimate up-and-coming guy. We are at welterweight next for Kevin Jousset and Brian Battle. That's an interesting step for Jousset. So Kevin Jousset, 10-2, 5-fight winning streak, 2-0 in the UFC. What was his fight that I was... He struggled a little bit with... No, he looked good against Kiefer Crosby. Is it Sankanon he kind of struggled with? I mean, won the fight, but I think that was the one where he kind of came back down to earth a little bit. But he's clearly talented. Fights out of City Kickboxing. He's 6'2", fairly big welterweight. 75-inch reach, whereas Battle, 10-2, 6'1", 77. Okay, so that's fairly comparable. 5-1 with a no contest, and you see coming off that no contest with Angelosa, that was weird. I mean, other than that, his only loss in the UFC is to Rinat Fakhretdinov, and I'm not going to hold that one too much against him. Wins over Trishan Gore, Takashi Sato, Gabe Green, weight miss there, AJ Fletcher, and then was doing fairly well. He was doing very well in the Angelosa fight before the eye poke. This is a tough one. Um, both these guys are pretty good. Again, two rising kind of guys. Battle's a little more experienced in the UFC. Jose is a little bit more of an explosive athlete. Battle's a little bit more steady. I think the odds are with Battle here, right? Yeah, but relatively close. See, Battle had his. Is he doing another weird fight? Because he's had a couple of weird ones. I don't think he. I think the fight after this is the one where he'll have some weirdness. I don't think it'll be here. So I'll agree with the odds. I'll go with Battle. But that's a perfectly. There's a lot of solid fights here. Featherweights, Morgan Chartier and Gabriel Miranda. This is kind of a setup here. Chartier 19-10-1. Had a pretty decent run going for. Anytime you get like double-digit losses, you always kind of go a little bit like, "Hey, what's up?" Only 1-1 in the UFC. Got a good win over Manolo Zucchini in his UFC debut. Then unfortunately fought Chipe Martiscal. Dropped a split decision. I think I agreed with scoring that for Martiscal. But, dude, Chipe Martiscal has kind of been tearing things up. So I'm not going to hold that one too much against him. He was supposed to fight AJ Cunningham here. That would have been Cunningham is very doggedly a wrestler. Miranda 17-6. Let's see. 1-1 in the UFC. Yeah, he fought Benoit Saint-Denis, and that did not go well for him. Then he dropped back down to featherweight, beat Shane Young. They're giving Charrier a setup's not quite the right word, because AJ Fletcher, I would have picked him to beat Fletcher, I think, but different kind of fight. Miranda on short notice. This feels like Charrier. Should I spell that right? Charriere. I did. Good for me. Few years of high school French. Still, some of that sticks in your head. Really, weird's the wrong word, but a really kind of weird fight here. Ferris Ziam and Matt Frivola. Frivola, the old steamroller, 11-4-1. 5-4-1 in the UFC. Had a three-fight winning streak not that long ago, beating Gennaro Valdez, Otman Zaitar, and Drew Dober. The Dober win in particular was really impressive because Drew Dober has a head like a cinder block, so stopping that guy with strikes is a heck of a thing. But then Benoit Saint-Denis kind of ran him over is a little bit of an exaggeration, but beat him up, stopped him in the first with a head kick. It was a really nice finish, actually. He was supposed to fight Michael Johnson earlier this year. That fell apart. Ziam is 15-4, 6-1, fairly tall for the division. Three-fight winning streak. 5-2 in the UFC. His only losses are to Don Madge, who only had like a cup of coffee in the UFC. But was one of the earlier South African guys to get to the UFC. Not the earliest. I think he was a little bit behind Gareth McClellan. Madge is still doing it. Isn't he in like PFL now? But decent fighter. See, then he got a couple of wins. Jamie Malarkey, Luigi Vendramini, lost to Terrence McKinney. 3 fights since then he's won. Michael Figlak, Jai Herbert in a split decision with Claudio Puelles. I think I agreed with him winning, but I couldn't swear to it. Solid fight. This strikes me as a fight that's going to be pretty dramatic one way or the other. Frivola's not a nip and tuck, close kind of fighter. It's fairly dramatic with him, and not saying we won't get a close decision when it's all said and done, but I imagine this will be fairly dramatic one way or the other. Very close fight on the odds. The odds are slightly with Ziam. Uh, Frivola coming off of that loss. That's a little troubling, but Ziam doesn't fight at all like Santini does. Ziam more of a sniper, long range, tries to use his reach. Frivola likes to get inside. I'm actually going to go with Frivola here. I may be very wrong, but Ziam has also not quite had his chin tested in a way that I think Frivola will. So, one of the fights I could do without next, Iwan Kutalaba and Ivan Urslan. So Kutalaba, 17-10-1, and 1 no contest. 6-9-1 in the UFC. Coming off of a loss to Felipe Lins. Dude, he's 1-3 in his last 4. Losses to Ryan Spann, Johnny Walker, Kennedy Zachukwu, and Felipe Lins, and somewhere in there's a win over Tanner Bozier. Makes leaning towards Ivan Urslan seem pretty easy. Urslan, a Croatian. 14-3, 1 fight winning streak. So won his last fight coming into his UFC debut. Let's see. Been in KSW recently, and KSW is a very legitimate promotion. It's not impossible for Kutalaba to win this fight, but I don't think I pick him very much to win at this point. So, I'm going with Urslan. It is crappy light heavyweight, so avoid betting on these like the plague. But I don't really pick Kutalaba at this point. See, next up we have another light heavyweight fight, so once again, could do without. Omar Sy and Dawoon Jung. Jung is on a 3-fight losing streak, lost to Dustin Jacoby, Devin Clark, and Carlos Ulberg. He had an interesting way of fighting Ulberg. It lasted a bit longer, but I was actually impressed with his win over Kennedy Zachukwu. He elbowed the crap out of him in the clinch to get that stoppage. It was really nice. But since then, not quite so great. The UFC seems to like Omar Sy and giving him a very winnable fight. They're not throwing him a guy on a 3-fight losing streak on accident. Is kind of the way to look at that. Yeah, but Sy is 10-0. Won his UFC debut. Wasn't horribly impressed with his game in that one, but I'm not going to hold that too much against him, given, relatively new career going. But UFC is very clearly giving him a winnable fight, and I don't have a problem picking him to do so. Let's see. Lightweights next. Ludovic Klein and Roosevelt Roberts. This was supposed to be Klein and... Who was he supposed to fight? Roberts is in on short notice. Nicholas Mata. Roberts, I think he's coming back to the UFC here. He's 12-4. 4-4 in the UFC with a no contest. And he came back to the UFC a bit ago. Okay. He had a little bit of some time in the UFC, struggled a bit, had a couple of wins, got cut after getting wheel kicked by Ignacio Bahamondes. He won a couple of fights outside the UFC. He competed on a season of The Ultimate Fighter, re-debuted for the promotion properly last November and got armbarred by Mateusz Rebecki. Rebecki is actually pretty, you know, talented, so I'm not going to hold that one too much against him, but now he's fighting Ludovic Klein. Klein, since moving to lightweight, has been pretty solid. He's 22-4 and 1 overall. Spent some time at featherweight before moving up. He's it's welterweight in boxing. Leave me alone. He's 6-2-1 in the UFC. Currently, hasn't lost since he fought Nate Landwehr in 2021. He was beating Landwehr too before that Anaconda choke late. Last couple of fights beat Ignacio Bahamondes, AJ Cunningham, Thiago Moises. Roberts is a pretty good fighter. I thought he got a little bit of a raw deal in how he was cut from the UFC, or at least like not renewed his contract. I think this will be a tough matchup for him stylistically, but he's definitely in this. I'm still picking Klein, but I'm not discounting Roberts would be a mistake. Let's see. Next, we have Taylor Lapilus and Vince Morales. This Morales is coming back to the UFC. Actually, I don't know where that one is in the card. I'm going to assume here, but there's two fights that we don't have specifically in the bout order yet. This one and Jacqueline Cavalcante and Nora Conole. Both of those are replacement fighters. Jermaine Durandamy pulled out of the fight with Cornola, and what switched on the other one? Not sure. Okay, this might just be oddly listed, but I'm going to put this one here and we'll just see what happens. So, Lapilus and Vince Morales. Let's have a look here. So, Lapilus came back to the UFC in 2023. His first UFC run was a little hit and miss back in like 15. Fought in that Polish card where the rematch between Krokop and Gonzaga. Krokop elbowing Gonzaga's head into the mat via ground and pound was some delicious irony given how their first fight went, but that's a whole other thing. He debuted there, went 3-1, but couldn't come to terms with the UFC or what have you, because won 2 fights, then lost to Eric Perez back when Goyito was going to be a big deal. Beat Leandro Issa and then left. Came back to the UFC in 2023, beat Cowlin Loughran, lost to Farid Basharat, did pretty well in that fight, but lost ultimately, then beat Cody Stamann most recently. Anyway, he's fighting Vince Morales, who will give him a pretty good fight. Morales is making his return to the UFC. His original run went from 18 to 22 and lost to Song Yadong, beat Ayman Zahabi, lost to Benito Lopez, and that's not a good thing. Lost to Gutierrez, beat Draco Rodriguez, beat Luis Smolka, lost to Jonathan Martinez, lost to Miles Johns, and then was kind of given the axe. Undefeated since then, wins over Teruto Ishihara, Joe Penfield, Yuki Miota, Luis Guerrero, and what got him back to the UFC, hit a really sick Peruvian necktie on Hunter Azure not all that long ago, just in August. So, fairly quick turnaround here for him. I still think this is... I think this is a Lapilus fight, but Morales has done some pretty solid work turning himself around since getting cut from the UFC. And I think once again, discounting him would be a mistake. Let's see. Next up, we have Eileen Perez and Daria Zelenziakova. Um, Perez 10-2, 3-fight winning streak, 3-1 in the UFC overall. Lost to Stephanie Egger. Since then, she's beaten Ashley Evans Smith, Lucia Pudilova, and Jocelyn Edwards, all via decision. She struggled down the stretch with Edwards. It was either she struggled early. I can't remember which one. Zelenziakova is 9-1, 2-fight winning streak, 1-0 in the UFC with a win over Montserrat Rendon. I frequently will pick the Russians in this case because it amuses me to do so, but I'm going with Perez. Uh, I think she's the slightly more proven fighter. It's all said and done. Okay, next up we have Daniel Barres and Victor Altamirano. This is our lone flyweight fight on the card, so it'll probably be awesome. Barres is Spanish, 16-6. Lost his UFC debut to Jafal Filio July of last year, so he's been out for a bit. If memory serves, he looked okay in that fight, but Filio's real good. Altamirano is 12-4, 2-fight losing streak, 2-3 in the UFC. Those losses most recently, Tim Elliott and Felipe dos Santos. That was a split decision. Kind of a tough one. My hunch is Barres, actually. I might be very wrong on that, but that's what I'll go with. And I'm just prepared to be wrong. Usually am when it comes to these things. I think next we'll list Nora Cornole and Jacqueline Cavalcante. Cornole, I think it's just Cornole. 8-1. 8-fight winning streak, 2-0 in the UFC, wins over Jocelyn Edwards and Melissa Mullins. She missed weight for the Mullins fight, but did a number on that girl by the time the second round rolled around. Jacqueline Cavalcante actually has looked pretty solid thus far. 7-1, 5-fight winning streak, 2-0 in the UFC. Wins over Zara Fain and Josiane Nunes. That Nunes fight, I remember this. That was a split decision. Absolute crap. I said at the time the judge who scored that for Nunes should be fired and probably flogged. Terrible. Terrible scorecard giving that fight to Nunes. Absolutely comical. Cornole is going to come forward into Cavalcante. This is actually a pretty good fight. They're both young. Probably not the only time these two fight would be my guess. I'm not talking an immediate rematch, but decent chance they see each other down the line a little bit. I think Cornole's going to be a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too monotone in her aggression. I think it's not going to. And Cavalcante looks pretty solid, so I'll go with Cavalcante. And kicking everything off, and if you're thinking, wait, there's another fight? Yeah, there's a lot of fights on this card. It's going to be a long one. We have Balaji Oki and Chris Duncan scoring off. Oki, I think one of the first Belgian guys to make it to the UFC. He is on a 9-fight winning streak, 1-0 in the UFC, split decision over Timmy Kwamba. That was a pretty good fight, from what memory serves me of that one. Duncan, 11-2, 2-1 in the UFC, but one of those guys that was kind of like, hey, it's supposed to be the next, big deal, and then split decision with Omar Morales. got a unanimous decision over Yanal Ashmuz, but the story of that fight was more Ashmuz like fighting very well with a broken arm. And most recently, kinda got tapped out by Manuel Torres. I mean, Torres is pretty good, so but one of those guys, Duncan, that hype and reality does not match the sales pitch. Mm. I got a hunch this is not going to go Duncan's way either. I'm not completely sold on that, but for the moment, I'll go with Oki. And yeah, that's what 13, 14 fights. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, 14 fights. Oy. That's just too many fights. That's going to be a long one. But Saturday, let me check the start time on that, actually. Okay, the prelims for that are going to start at noon Eastern, so this is going to be prime time in France because they're on ESPN Plus. So Saturday morning, morning for me, that'll be 10 a.m. where I am. We will be covering that over in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. So stop by, say hello. I always appreciate that. Because I 10 a.m. isn't like the early morning, but I am not, feels a little bit early to me because I'm a degenerate, I suppose. All right. 14 fights. We only did that in 30 minutes. That's a decent clip. All right. Let's do a little bit of news here, shall we? And then we'll probably get out of here. So, first in the news segment, Dana White talking about being ready to make a serious move into boxing again. I'm not too surprised at this, mostly because the Saudis seem like money marks, especially Turkey Al-Sheikh. So, if they're able to kind of make some kind of agreement with him, Dana White can try to craft a boxing setup that's more favorable to how he likes to do business, i.e., from a position of giant power where he can cut athlete costs to the bone. We'll try to keep an eye on this a little bit. I mean, Dana at this point is just. He's been on autopilot, and to put it charitably, for the UFC for a little bit now. Um, and then he's got the power slap thing, which is just absolutely god awful. Just terrible. So if he's going to make a push for boxing, we'll see how that goes. My hunch is not all that well, but we'll see. Could be wrong. Let's see. Other bits of news. Let's see. Aljamain Sterling out of the fight with Movsar Evloev. That was for UFC 307. Some kind of an injury. He's out of that one. We'll see who they can get for Evloev between now and then, if anyone. But Sterling's out, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. I don't know. Do I want to talk about Conor? Probably worth noting, Conor McGregor was in attendance for the Anthony Joshua-Daniel Dubois fight yesterday. And Dubois upset a few apple carts by knocking. Dude, he battered Joshua. Got him on the back foot right away, and Joshua off the back foot is not the same fighter. He dropped him like 3 or 4 times before getting the knockout. He got it before it was like the 5th round, I think, when he got that. It was 5 or 6. It was. Yeah, he just kind of clubbed away at Joshua. Again, upset a few apple carts. Tyson Fury, in particular, really wanted to have the big fight with Anthony Joshua in the UK. They might still wind up making that happen. We got to see what happens between Fury and Usyk in their rematch anyway. And Dubois is going to be making noise about a rematch with Usyk because he's hanging his hat on a weird call from the ref in their fight. I think he did punch Usyk low, but that's just me. It's like the rest of that fight was all that close anyway. Usyk got him out of there because Usyk is one of the best boxers in the world. But Conor was in attendance, and he's making a lot of noise about like really wanting to be done with the UFC. There's 2 fights left on his deal. I talked about this a little bit like last week or so that I think there's plenty of blame to go both ways on that. You know, some of the stuff Conor's been doing, some stuff the UFC's been doing, and that's just yeah, it's just gonna be ugly for a while. Is my hunch. So yeah, there's a few minutes there. All right. Let me check Twitter, see if anything crazy has happened. If not, we'll do plugs and get out of here. Okay, nope, nothing new there, at least in the MMA sphere. So, what do we got for plugs this week? Last week was the TV party for Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 1. You can find that over on the W2M network. That was Mark, me, um, Dorian Price, and Alexis Hana. I think next month we're doing Season 2 and then Season 3 in November. So be on the lookout for any of that if that's your bag. Damn You Hollywood on Monday. We will be reviewing Transformers 1. Seems to be generally getting some positive buzz, so I haven't seen it yet, but I will see it before I review it, so tune in for that. Then WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC event on Saturday, back here next Sunday. Sunday. I don't know when you listen to this. I recorded Sunday. / very, very early Monday morning, depending on how the day goes. We'll be reviewing UFC on ESPN Plus 101, and we will preview UFC 307. That's October 5th. Yes. UFC back on pay-per-view. They're back here in Utah, taking money from the state and my taxes because that's what we do. Good grief. Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Another 14 fight card. What the heck? Golly. Well, in fairness, Movsar Evloev needs a new opponent. We'll see if that pans out. Mauricio Hufi needs a new opponent. See if that pans out. Austin Hubbard is Alexander Hernandez is replacing Nate Landwehr. That's a downgrade. We have Tim Means versus Court McGee. I think that's a. See how many fights on this thing got changed. Hang on, I gotta switch websites here real fast for 307. No? Could have sworn that was a shifted fight. Okay, some of these are not accurately listed here. Okay. Owen St. Preux and Ryan Spann got moved here. Why, God, why? Carla Esparza is having her last fight. She's already announced this is her last one. She's going to retire for some reason. Iho Portieria. I already mentioned, like Ketlin Vieira and Kayla Harrison. That's here in case something happens to Raquel Pennington or Juliana Pena, which is another fight that, good grief, who could possibly care about it. Jose Aldo back at altitude, back here in Utah, taking on Mario Bautista. That's actually a pretty good fight. Main event, Alex Pereira, Khalil Roundtree Jr. That's fine, I guess. I don't care. It's light heavyweight. I mean, I'll watch Alex Pereira because it's Alex Pereira, but that whole division is just crap. Stephen Thompson and Joaquin Buckley is a good fight. Okay, this is not a great card. Both of those title fights are kind of nobody wants either of those fights, right? I mean, the fighters clearly were willing to agree to them, but like, there's no big swell of fan support. Sorry about that. There's no big swell of fan support for either of those fights. It's not like everyone was jumping up and down going, we must have Pereira and Roundtree. I mean, it's fine. I'm sure it'll be a good fight, but... And, women's bantamweight may as well not exist. It's so bad. But next week, full preview, so that's my 2 cents at the moment. More detailed stuff next week. All right, I will hope to see you all then. Okay. Till next time, thank you all very much for listening. Appreciate you as always. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.